Hi guys, it's Elle from the Mage System, and I've got an important topic for you here today. We often hear that DID is essentially a very severe form of PTSD. However, they don't seem very similar that much. I mean, the only kind of similarity between them is the trauma and sometimes the dysfunction. But it's a spectrum. Every illness in the goddamn DSM is pretty much, is a spectrum. Some of them are more like circular spectrums if you want to get specific, but they're spectrums. So DID is a spectrum. It's not just you have it really bad, amnesia between it, or you just don't have it at all. And PTSD is on that spectrum, more specifically CPTSD. We all know if you have DID, you have PTSD. We know that. But more specifically, you're going to have CPTSD. And I will have to define what that is. So, DID, right? When you're a kid, you're born with all these ego states, and they're all responsible for different things. One is for food, one is for safety, one is for getting love from your caregiver, one's for playing and exploring, one is for, going to the bathroom, whatever. These ego states, between the ages of like 7 to 9, all integrate and form one cohesive personality. We all know the explanation, right? However, if there's trauma, aka the ego states are disagreeing with each other, for example, the ego state that needs food views caregiver as safe, but the ego state that needs safety views caregiver as dangerous, then when it comes to 6 to 9, they can't integrate because they've been too separate from one another. And if you have a bunch of like really severe repeated trauma in between then the ego state that's best adapted to like deal with that will come forth, and there will be an amnesia wall between to protect the people that need to be protected in your head. And that's when you get full-blown DID with amnesia. However, now we're going to go one step back on the spectrum. OSDD 1B is whenever you have those multiple ego states that are separated and develop as alters, except you don't have the amnesia in between. Then there is CPTSD. Alters can be very big individuals that are just as complex as the host, or they can be little fragments that are only responsible for like washing the dishes or something, They can be very big or they can be very small in a variety of ways, They can be small in so many different ways. I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say. When you develop CPTSD, which comes from repeated trauma, a very tiny little part will form. And it's not an alter. It is not an alter. But it's like a really tiny alter. But you don't have DID. Because the thing that makes an alter is that it isn't you. When you get CPTSD, you'll have this really tiny little part here that identifies as you. However, it perceives the world differently. So if you have CPTSD, let me know if this sounds familiar, right? You are going about your day and you're fine, and then a trigger happens, and maybe per se you're not launched into a flashback, but instead your complete state of mind does a 180. Not to the point where it's beyond just being in a mood. It's an entire different state of mind, to the point where you almost can't remember what it felt like to have the other state of mind. So what I forgot to mention is whenever you enter this little tiny ego state that perceives the world more negatively than you do, is that, the normal you might try to reason with it a little bit, but the sentiment you get back from it will probably or might be something like, but no, it's been this way the whole time. It's been this negative of a perception the whole time. And that is because for that bit of you, it has. Just like one alter can feel an entirely different emotion while you're feeling another one. So it is feeling a different emotion the whole time in a way. So I don't know if that helps you or if it's just interesting, or I don't really know, but that's what I've noticed. And this new state of mind you're in is often going to be one that sucks, that views everything as unsafe or not warm and not loving and godless and all that. It's essentially two separate states of mind that are sometimes even cut off from each other by not remembering what it felt like to be the other one. It's like these almost very tiny personalities, but what distinguishes them from alters is that it's still you. That is at this end of the spectrum. So if your CPTSD gets really severe as a child, it can be DID. However, if you don't acquire enough trauma within your window of tolerance to get DID, you might get OSDD or CPTSD. And another thing to note is you can only get DID in childhood. You can only get OSDD 1B in childhood. I'm not sure about 1A if I'm being honest. But with CPTSD, you can acquire this in adulthood. The parts aren't big enough to the point where you can get it in adulthood. However, it tends to be more severe when acquired in childhood because, you know, there's kind of a spectrum to it, you know. There's still going to be some remnants of it's often more severe if you get it in childhood. So that is how they kind of bleed into one another. I thought it was kind of an important thing to explain because I've done so much research on YouTube, but it took me a while to find somebody to explain that, and that is huge. That is a very important detail. I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs. So Breadcrumbs and I wanted to explain that, and I think that's all. If you have something nice to say, you can say it in the comments. I'm interested from hearing from you guys. It's a very small channel, almost 50 subscribers, but when I do get a comment, it's really nice because I just like seeing other people's experiences and, you know, having a community, even if it's very microscopic, it's lovely. I hope you enjoyed this. Breadcrumbs, say something cool. I'll see you later. Bye, friends.